Hi, my name is Tanika Diagvilla, and today myself and Max Schultz will be presenting the Fulton vs. Philadelphia 593 US 2021 case for our religious freedom assignment. It addresses a conflict between religious freedom and anti-discrimination laws between the CSS, which is the Catholic Social Services, and the city of Philadelphia. So please enjoy. Thanks.
The Supreme Court case Fulton v. City of Philadelphia in 2021 tackled a significant conflict between religious freedoms and anti-discrimination laws in the United States. The case centered around Catholic Social Services, or CSS, a religious foster care agency that had worked with the City of Philadelphia for decades. CSS refused to certify same-sex couples as foster parents, citing their religious beliefs. In response, the city stopped referring foster children to the agency, arguing that this violated the city's non-discrimination policies. CSS filed a lawsuit claiming that Philadelphia's actions infringed on their rights under the First Amendment, especially the Free Exercise Clause. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled in favor of CSS, stating that the city's policies was not neutral or generally applicable because it allowed for exceptions at the discretion of city officials, yet refused to grant one to CSS. The ruling underscored the delicate balance courts must maintain between protecting religious liberties and upholding principles of equal treatment. It remains a key example of the legal and cultural tensions surrounding these deeply held values. The petitioners in Fulton v. City of Philadelphia were Sharon L. Fulton, a foster parent, and Catholic Social Services, or CSS, a faith-based agency that had partnered with the city for years. CSS refused to certify same-sex couples as foster parents, citing deeply held religious beliefs. Because of this policy, the City of Philadelphia, the respondent in the case, ended its foster care contract with CSS, arguing that the agency was violating the city's non-discrimination policy. The case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where several key figures played pivotal roles. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, which sided with CSS. The court ruled that the city's policy violated CSS's First Amendment right because it was not applied in a neutral or generally applicable way. Justice Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas concurred with the decision, but took it further, calling for the court to revisit and possibly overturn the precedent set in Employment Division v. Smith, a major case on religious freedoms. Catholic Social Services, or CSS, is a religious foster care agency that had worked with the City of Philadelphia for more than 50 years. CSS was responsible for certifying foster families and had long been a trusted partner in the city's child welfare system. However, due to its religious beliefs, CSS would not certify same-sex couples as foster parents. The agency held that the marriage is a sacred bond between a man and a woman, and that placing children with same-sex couples would violate its faith-based principles. In 2018, the City of Philadelphia implemented a non-discrimination policy that required all agencies receiving city contracts to refrain from discrimination based on sexual orientation. When city officials learned of CSS's refusal to certify same-sex couples, they responded by halting foster care referrals to the agency and announced they would not renew the contract unless CSS agreed to comply with the policy. Catholic Social Services, or CSS, is a religious foster care agency that had worked with the City of Philadelphia for more than 50 years. CSS was responsible for certifying foster families and had long been a trusted partner in the city's child welfare system. However, due to its religious beliefs, CSS would not certify same-sex couples as foster parents. The agency held that the marriage is a sacred bond between a man and a woman, and that placing children with same-sex couples would violate its faith-based principles. In 2018, the City of Philadelphia implemented a non-discrimination policy that required all agencies receiving city contracts to refrain from discrimination based on sexual orientation. When city officials learned of CSS's refusal to certify same-sex couples, they responded by halting foster care referrals to the agency and announced they would not renew the contract unless CSS agreed to comply with the policy. CSS argued that by ending their foster care contract, Philadelphia infringed on its rights to freely exercise religion. The agency claimed that it should be allowed to decline certifying same-sex couples based on sincerely held religious beliefs, while still continuing its work within the city's foster care system. Philadelphia, on the other hand, defended its position by pointing to its non-discrimination policy. The city argued that the policy was both neutral and generally applicable, designed to ensure equal treatment, expand the pool of foster parents, and reduce legal risk tied to discrimination practices. City officials also noted that while the policy did allow for discretionary exemption, none had ever been granted before, emphasizing that CSS was not unfairly singled out.
Some basic facts of the lower court's decision was that the Federal District Court ruled in favor of Philadelphia, holding that the non-discrimination requirements were neutral and generally applicable. The Third Circuit Court Appeals affirmed this decision. The Supreme Court review was that CSS appealed the Supreme Court, which granted review in February 2020. On June 17, 2021, the court ruled in favor of CSS, finding that Philadelphia's policy was not generally applicable because it allowed discretionary exemptions but denied one for religious reasons. This triggered strict scrutiny, which Philadelphia's failed to meet. A key fact is while CSS was refused to certify same-sex couples as foster parents, it had placed LGBTQ plus in children in homes and referred same-sex couples to other agencies. This distinction underscored CSS's argument that its actions were rooted in religious beliefs rather than outright discrimination. The legal issue of religious freedom. The core question was, did Philadelphia's enforcement of its non-discrimination policy violate CSS's right to free exercise of religion under the First Amendment? The key legal framework was free exercise clause protects religious practices from government interference. The Employment Division v. Smith in 1990 came to neutral, generally applicable laws need not to accommodate religious exceptions. And Philadelphia's policy was, the city argued its policy was neutral, but the court found it non-generally applicable because it allowed discretionary exemptions, for example, for individual commissioners. The court's holding. Unanimous ruling that Philadelphia's policy failed Smith's generally applicability test, triggering strict scrutiny. The city lacked a compelling interest to deny CSS an exemption, as it had granted secular exceptions, for example, for foster parents' preferences. Reasons for our agreement was, number one, protecting religious freedom. The free exercise clause is a cornerstone of the First Amendment, ensuring individuals and organizations can live according to their deeply held religious beliefs. CSS's refuse to certify same-sex couples was not an act of hostility, but a sincere expression of its faith and its religion. Denying CSS as a contract solely because of its religious beliefs would have set a dangerous precedent for government overreach into religious practices. Our second reason is no harm to foster care services. CSS's refusal to certify same-sex couples did not prevent those couples from fostering children through other agencies. Philadelphia had over 20 other foster care agencies that certified same-sex couples. This means that CSS's policy did not significantly impact the availability of foster care resources, and allowing CSS to continue its work ensured more children could find loving homes without forcing the agency to compromise its beliefs. Our third reason for our agreement was policy was not neutral or generally applicable. Philadelphia's non-discrimination policy allowed discretionary exemptions for secular reasons, but denied one for religious reasons. This lack of neutrality unfairly targeted CSS and triggered strict scrutiny, which Philadelphia failed to meet. The court rightly recognized that the city's actions violated constitutional protections for religious organizations. Overall, our conclusion Fulton versus Philadelphia reaffirmed that religious organizations cannot be excluded from public programs solely due to their beliefs. However, the debate over Smith's future ensures this issue will return to the court. Thank you.